Let's remember, biggest allies are usually gay. Welcome back, everyone, to Gasp, the podcast for the gays, the girls, and especially the gay girls. And special shout out to bisexuals this week. As a bisexual, this is Bisexual Visibility Day. And listen, hot take, I feel like bisexuals with boyfriends have had a lot of visibility this year. So shout out bisexuals with girlfriends because everyone forgets we exist. For real. Let's get into it. In a little over a week, Taylor Swift, we all know her, you guys know her, will release her 12th album, The Life of a Showgirl. One of the unheard tracks is called Elizabeth Taylor. We know there's always a reason that Taylor Swift does pretty much anything. So why is she writing a song about Elizabeth Taylor? Of course, we haven't heard it yet, but we know it's about or referencing Elizabeth Taylor, so pretty good jumping off point, right? Is Taylor inspired by Elizabeth's long, dazzling Hollywood career? Is she enamored by photos of her violet eyes? That's why I'm wearing purple today. Is she intrigued by Elizabeth's infamous list of husbands? 7 specifically, might I add? And does she relate to how America and the world used Elizabeth's love life as their own entertainment? Today, we're diving into the life of Elizabeth Taylor. We're talking about her enchanting career, her stardom, all 7 of her husbands, the theory that she inspired the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and how all of this connects back to Taylor Swift's life and experience with fame. And of course, the upcoming album, Life of a Showgirl. Who really was the real Elizabeth Taylor? As she said in her own words, quote, "One version of me is flesh and blood and one is cellophane." Before we get into that, and before we get into Elizabeth Taylor's life and career, housekeeping stuff, please subscribe to my YouTube. If you're listening to this in audio right now, you don't even have to watch on YouTube, but it really is important for me to get subscribers on YouTube so that I can monetize more from that. As I've said before, love you guys so much, but there are more audio people than YouTube, which is totally fine. If you're an audio listener only and you want to stay that way, no problem. Just go ahead and give me 5 stars and subscribe on YouTube. Okay. Secondly, I have bonus content coming out. I've been sick. I've been traveling. I apologize. However, I have a really fun episode coming out on Patreon. If you're not on my Patreon, you're really missing out because I feel like I'm a little bit more chaotic on Patreon than I am here. And for multiple nights, because the New Heights podcast was so long, I said I wasn't going to watch it and support it, but honestly, I was intrigued and I had to. I got high and I watched the New Heights episode and I pretty much documented all of my high thoughts in a long notes list. And I'm going to make an episode talking about my high thoughts of the New Heights podcast. And of course, there's some hot takes. Okay. So that's going to be on my Patreon in just a few days. And, of course, I'm going to go live for the Life of a Showgirl. So much going on in Taylor world. That's why there's a lot more Taylor focused content right now I'm putting out on my podcast because of course, and it's a nice distraction from the rest of this shitty fucking country. So, and global listeners, I'm jealous of you. So go check out my TikTok and register for that live event because I'm going to go live and the night of the release and we can listen together and it's going to be very, very fun. Lastly, if you are a Patreon subscriber, you get bonus episodes and Patreon shout outs. So today I'm shouting out my number one gasper, Jenna D. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing. All right, let's talk about Elizabeth Taylor because I feel like Elizabeth Taylor is one of those iconic Hollywood household names that we all reference, but we don't know much really about. At least that was my experience. I feel like, of course, everyone knows Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, and I feel like that's kind of where the story ends for people. But I've learned so much. And again, this is one of those moments where thank you, Taylor Swift, for making me dive into certain people that I don't think I would have, at least this much of a deep dive, because there's the stories that we hear from Hollywood and then there's the truth about people. Sometimes those things are the same thing. A lot of the times it's not. So First off, let's just start out with Elizabeth Taylor, the icon, what the world knows about her, right? She was born in 1932, lucky number 32 for me, and died in 2011. She was a Pisces, which I feel like makes sense. And she was an English-American actress and activist. She was a child star in the 40s, so like she really got into the industry pretty young and had her like peak fame in the 50s and 60s, but of course was an icon for her entire life. And now, like, she's one of those like icons that's like real true Hollywood, like just the Hollywood Elizabeth Taylor, same thing, right? The Elizabeth Taylor biography website has a lot of really interesting information about her and does more than just like states facts, but actually like talks about her feelings as well, which is really interesting. So I would go check out that website. But here's one of the quotes about her career from the biography website. Quote, "With striking beauty and undeniable talent, Elizabeth Taylor captivated audiences. As a precocious child actor, an unforgettable leading lady, she played legendary female characters who embodied strength, integrity, and unapologetic femininity. Her career, which spanned 6 decades, earned her 5 Oscar nominations and 2 Best Actress wins. Those Best Actress wins from the Academy was Best Actress for Butterfield 8 and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. If you're a Swiftie, as I'm sure most of you are, that's going to seem relevant to you, right? We'll get into that later. Another quote: "From the mid-1980s until her death, Elizabeth's greatest role was that of activist. In a society paralyzed by fear, she used her fame to shine a light on the injustices and ignorance surrounding the HIV/AIDS epidemic," which is so iconic and important for that time for someone that big to talk about this. She co-founded AMFAR and founded the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, receiving many awards for her advocacy, including the Presidential Citizens Medal, slay, and in 2000, Queen Elizabeth II named her a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. I don't know what the fuck that means, but it sounds important. And I'm sure everyone's heard of AMFAR. Like, that was literally co-founded by Elizabeth Taylor. Like, truly an icon. All right, final quote. "Throughout her life, Elizabeth possessed an abiding will to survive in the face of personal tragedy," which we'll get into as well, "and an extraordinary capacity for love. She was married 8 times to 7 men," iconic, "and her greatest joy in life was her family and 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren." Pretty iconic, long list of accolades, super famous, amazing actress, activist, mother, grandmother, etc. How did the world see Elizabeth Taylor? Because the actual woman, the person, is not always reflected in how Hollywood presents someone and how the world receives a person. And that's kind of something that's like at the basis of my podcast, is pretty much like exploring the real like thoughts and feelings behind like stardom. I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of pop culture. And not a lot of people like necessarily recognize that the, facade is maybe different than the person. Pretty basic concept, but that's what's so interesting about pop culture in Hollywood. Like, they make money off of this image and what they like sell a person to be. It's like a real life fairy tale, a real life movie. She, throughout her life, was really known as a sex icon and like the center of global scandals. At one point, the Pope actually commentated on her relationship scandal. That's how much this was taking over the world, right? She was the star of Cleopatra. That's also very relevant to Taylor Swift's photo shoot for her upcoming album. She was this film star. She was this captivating actress. And very iconically and very notably, she actually was a violet-eyed beauty. Her eyes were actually violet. They looked violet in certain lighting. Just like mysterious, beauty, talented icon we're talking about, right? I feel like you guys kind of get a sense now of who Elizabeth Taylor was as is presented by Hollywood and the world of entertainment. She always wanted to be an actress, right? The issue with being an actress at the time and also kind of now is you have to be gorgeous. You have to be pretty to be an actress. But at the same time, once you get into that door, you're then only viewed as your beauty. And so her talent, I feel like, is really kind of looked over, and she's just kind of like, oh my god, icon, amazing, beautiful. And it's like, She was a talented actress. That's why she became famous. That was her business. That was her craft. Let's go into Elizabeth Taylor, the person. Who was Elizabeth Taylor, the real woman? Right? Because all of that information, we don't really know who she really is with that information. So what's really kind of amazing and honestly haunting about Elizabeth Taylor is that she actually did a very long taped interview in 1964 by journalist Richard Merriman. This is 40 hours of interviews, and she was 32 at the time, so this is in 1964, and some of them were in 1965. These tapes were made for a biography, but it was never made. When did we get access to these tapes? Literally in fucking 2024, which is pretty fucking iconic. These tapes were stored in the journalist's attic and then they were found. If you guys haven't read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I'm probably going to give away a lot of information over the course of this episode. So I don't know, either read it, come back to this episode, or just, will be a teaser for the book. This is very similar to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. There was like a taped interview of Evelyn Hugo. Now it's different because that was at the end of Evelyn's life, but this is really interesting that we have her own words talking about her life in a very like candid way, not in the, she's not trying to pitch herself as a Hollywood icon. She's being truthful. I take it back. These actually were reclaimed in like 2019. But regardless, this is all actually after the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was released, which is kind of ironic that after this happened, there's still more details like pointing to how similar the character of Evelyn Hugo and Elizabeth Taylor are. In this interview, the reporter asks, quote, "What do you think your image is?" And Taylor says, quote, Elizabeth Taylor, "completely superficial, immoral. There's the person that my family knows and the other Elizabeth Taylor, the commodity. One is flesh and blood and the other is cellophane." That gave me chills when I first read it, because this is something that really only a woman at this peak of fame can understand, and something that Gaylors and a lot of other people have talked about, and Taylor Swift has talked about, of how she has to split herself into. There's two of you. There's one, the one for the public eye, and there's the other. There's the real woman. And it's just so crazy that we get this actual quote of her and no one knew it until the 2000s. Elizabeth Taylor was thrown into the industry very young. She was thrown into it at age 10, and she actually did want to be an actress. So she wasn't forced to do this against her will, but obviously, pushed around by the industry and abused for sure. She was very quickly treated as a woman when she was a child and sexualized by the industry, but at the same time was expected to be pure. Hollywood and America and the world expected this young girl to be pure in the face of everyone sexualizing her. It's a very interesting dynamic that women and famous women have to go through. You have to be okay with other people putting sexual, viewing you in a really sexual grown-up way, but at the same time you have to be poising yourself as a Christian virgin. She was also under a long MGM contract that restricted and confined her. This is very similar to a lot of stars at the time, and we can see this today with Taylor Swift being under a contract that didn't allow her to have as much creative control as she wanted, and also didn't give her as much monetary benefit. The real Elizabeth Taylor also converted to Judaism. She faced tragedy of the death of one of her husbands at one point, which was a plane crash. Super, super scarring. And of course, you don't see any of this on the outside. This is who the real woman is. One of the Oscars, the first Oscar that she won for Butterfield 8, she hated the movie. It's just so fascinating, hearing about the truth of this person versus the outside. You have to be gracious and be oh my God, I won an Oscar for this movie. Meanwhile, she hated it. The reason why she hated it, and this is from the Elizabeth Taylor biography website, is, quote, the film played an insidious part in the defamation of Elizabeth's public image, as her character engaged in two love triangles, painting her yet again as the irresistible homemaker the world already believed her to be, due to the scandal that arose from her relationship with Eddie Fisher. And she's forced to do this movie. Like, she didn't choose to do this movie. At one point, she almost died from pneumonia. She also faced addiction and checked herself into a rehab facility. And, you know, a lot of women stars around the 40s, 50s, 60s, they were like forced to take drugs and methamphetamines. Like, that's a huge part of Judy Garland's story. And just so they could work harder and harder. Like, it's crazy how much Hollywood has fucked up women in the industry. And you don't see any of it, but I don't know why people think that like all of a sudden they would just stop. It hasn't gone from this bad to just perfect. Okay, there is still elements of this type of abuse in Hollywood today. Elizabeth Taylor was a mother and grandmother, and she loved acting. She wanted to be an actress, and this was her dream. She was also a perfume developer. She created one of the most successful perfume lines. She was also a businesswoman. She wasn't just like this pretty girl that like other people used to make money. She was also the brains behind a lot of these projects as well. She negotiated her Cleopatra contract, and she actually at this point negotiated a $1 million upfront salary. At this point is unheard of. And she knows that her image and her being in a movie is going to make everyone else money. She's using this as leverage. What does it sound like? Like, I'm sorry, I just have to bring everything back to Taylor Swift, because women in this industry are not usually negotiating their contracts and using this to benefit them, because it was really difficult to. And Elizabeth Taylor really was like the first person to really do this. At the point that she made this $1 million deal, it made her the highest paying actor in history up to this point, man or woman. Insane. Icon. But of course, you wouldn't know this, because at the time that she's like promoting Cleopatra and there's all of these like love affairs being talked about on the news, that's what's being talked about. Not her like strategy, not her business, and not like how smart she is and powerful she is. And yes, money is power, but more about being like, oh my God, the sex affair. That's what's being talked about. Interesting, right? She was also an activist against AIDS, and I know people talk about that now, but this is one of the biggest parts of her career and what she really cherished a lot. And she may have been queer. We shall get into that. I mean, she probably was queer. We don't have documentation of like long-term affairs she had with women, but we do have documentation of like a affair she had with a woman that we'll get into. Let's talk about the 7 husbands of Elizabeth Taylor. It is really fucking crazy that she had exactly 7 husbands, and just like, of course she inspired the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Even Elizabeth Taylor's official website has a page titled The 7 Husbands of Elizabeth Taylor. And I know they're trying to like milk off the book for sure, but like, it's just like, come on, guys, that's crazy. Some of them are very similar to the characters in The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Elizabeth Taylor's first husband was named Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr. They were married from 1950 to 1951, and I'm pretty sure Elizabeth Taylor was only 18. Conrad was actually like pretty abusive, and as the Elizabeth Taylor website says, quote, what began as a fairy tale quickly became a nightmare, and that Elizabeth endured both mental and physical abuse that actually resulted in a miscarriage, which is literally god awful, leading to their divorce 8 months into the marriage. So this marriage really only lasted like around a year, and very similar to Dawn Adler. And again, these are spoilers for 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but Dawn Adler is Evelyn Hugo. These are all fictional characters. Second husband. And again, has kind of the elements of Ernie Diaz, because like first husband and she was really young, but also more so Dawn Adler, because Dawn Adler was physically abusive towards Evelyn. And at this point, it's giving that Taylor Jenkins Reid is like modeling the husbands and the whole character and everything around Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth's second husband is Michael Wilding. They were married from 1952 to 1957. He was 20 years older than her, and looked it, I'll say, for sure. And he was also an actor, and they had 2 sons together. Elizabeth Taylor's website says that their divorce ended because he struggled to accept that she was a breadwinner, which is iconic of her, that she was like the breadwinner and he was like, you know, a distinguished, renowned actor, right? Her third husband was Mike Todd, and they were married from 1957 to 1958. As you can see at this point, from 1950, she's married every single year to different men. Serial monogamist for sure. But kind of just fucking awesome. Like, I'm like kind of obsessed that she like finishes the marriages and then is like, I'll have another right away. Like, they're just lined up. Elizabeth Taylor's website says that Mike Todd was one of Elizabeth's true great loves. Again, I don't know if like she shared this with them or this is just like their idea. They married in 1957. They ended up having a daughter together. But tragically, he was the one that actually passed away in a plane crash in March 1958, which is really fucking traumatic. And at this point, she is really young and she's already been married. This is her third husband. And now he passes away. Like, that's a lot to handle. That's a lot. Then comes Eddie Fisher, who she is married to from 1959 to 1964. The Elizabeth Taylor website says that she sought solace and comfort in Mike's closest friend, Eddie Fisher. Here's the fucking drama, guys. Debbie Reynolds was Eddie Fisher's wife, and he left Debbie for Elizabeth. Apparently, she and Elizabeth Taylor were also friends. So it's not great. It's not looking good for Elizabeth Taylor or Eddie Fisher. Where this also gets really dramatic is, you know, this was a huge fucking scandal, huge fucking affair. People are freaking out. And this is when MGM decides to make the movie Butterfield 8, starring Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor. So you can see how now they're like capitalizing on this drama of hers. She didn't like this though. It's not like this is her own doing and she's like intentionally trying to capitalize on it. And that's when she wins the Oscar. It's really fucked up that MGM like makes them kind of like play out what was happening in real life. This so connects to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo because multiple reasons. Eddie Fisher was a singer. And Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, one of the husbands is Mick Riva, who is a singer. And it's a huge fucking scandal when Evelyn and Mick get together and have like a quick romance, right? And of course, we need to remember most of the husbands in Evelyn Hugo are PR relationships. Most of them are not real. We're assuming in the story of Elizabeth Taylor, like her real life, that most of these are real relationships. Like, I don't think she was a lesbian, but again, we don't really know. We don't. So just keep that in mind. There's just a lot of connections right now with the husbands. Another husband of Evelyn's is Rex North. And even though this character is not actually very similar to Eddie Fisher, they have this like scandal of affairs. And that's during a movie that's starring them two together. So Rex North and Evelyn Hugo are in a movie together. This is a PR relationship. And then they stage an affair. So that's so fucking related to the fact that Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher are in a movie about their affair. It's a little bit too on the nose, right? Do you see how many similarities right now? And that's just like, besides the fact that it's Seven Husbands specifically. After Eddie Fisher comes the iconic Richard Burton. Richard and Elizabeth are married from 1964 to 1974. So this at this point is her longest marriage. They divorce in 1974, then they get back together in 1975, and then they divorce again in 1976. Pretty fucking iconic. Like, kind of a slay. Elizabeth Taylor website says the love of her life and the marriage she married twice. Apparently it was like, you know, kind of a passionate, like tumultuous relationship. And it seemed like there was almost like too much passion for the marriage. That's kind of like the idea. They started multiple movies together and they met on the set of Cleopatra. They both starred as the leads and they just became like one of the most iconic couples of all time. Taylor Swift references like Burton to my Taylor, like they were like pop culture royalty. Okay. Everyone was talking about them. And at this point, remember, like Elizabeth Taylor is so famous kind of because of all of these relationships and how beautiful she is and like, you know, captivating on screen, but also like the lore and the stories that we're hearing about her. And it sounds a lot like Taylor Swift. What is on purpose? What is purposeful? We don't know how much she's controlling this narrative. We're never really gonna know, right? But I think what's iconic right now is the fact that like we have to separate like what we hear about these marriages versus like what maybe was actually going on. What we see is not necessarily what's true. So we hear about all these relationships, we hear about the affairs. Is that exactly what happened every single time? Probably not. This is this famous, iconic woman, and her affairs and her scandals are helping her success, bringing her to all-time fame. Some of that is great for her, and some of that is like unintended consequences that she did not want. But what's difficult for women in Hollywood is like you kind of have to use the system that's already against you to your advantage. And that's what she does with Cleopatra, negotiating that $1 million deal. So after Richard Burton, she marries John Warner from 1976 to 1982. This is her like political regal era that's kind of like a little bit random, but also she starts like her activism at this point too. He becomes a senator, so fucking wild. And at this point, this is her sixth husband. Oh, she's such a star. Okay, then after this, her last husband, which may have been like her most iconic venture yet, is Larry Fortensky. They were married from 1991 to 1996. Larry Fortensky was actually a construction worker 20 years younger than her. Like, you cannot make this shit up. It's so fucking iconic. I don't think all of her relationships were PR. I think maybe like a very select few of them were. But Larry Fortensky, I'm like, you're not just randomly dating him for PR. Like, you are in love with this random man, and I'm actually obsessed with it. She met him at the Betty Ford Center in 1988, and he was her final marriage. This marriage, here's the weirdest thing I found out. This wedding was in 1991, so it wasn't that long ago. And it's just kind of wild how long she lived. Like, she was a star in the 40s. And now she's getting married by Marianne Williamson. Yep. Marianne Williamson randomly married Larry Fortensky and Elizabeth Taylor, and they had like 200 guests. It was a huge wedding. There was like helicopters watching. It was crazy. And they had their wedding at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch, which is disgusting. That's not a great look for Elizabeth Taylor. And then after that, she never married again, and she died in 2011. As much as like, you know, people were saying, oh, this is like so ridiculous. Like, she's a slut. Like, she's a serial monogamist. She can't keep a husband, all this stuff. This is really breaking boundaries of her. To come up into stardom in the 40s and 50s and have multiple marriages, not just multiple, 7 marriages, and have all of these affairs when she's supposed to be this pure girl that other people sexualize, but then she decides to do whatever the hell she wants in her love life. That is unheard of. Like, that is so important to just like decide to do whatever you want to do. And as she got older, she decided to like take more of her own life into her own hands and do what she wanted to do and be like an anti-AIDS activist and marry a construction worker. Like, oh my God, so iconic. Okay, let's talk about all the connections to the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Obviously, we've already talked about a lot, but what have we not talked about yet? What is a huge part of 7 Husbands and of Evelyn Hugo? It's the queerness aspect. Through what I found out, through my research, it seems from a documented source that Elizabeth Taylor had an affair with Marilyn Monroe. And I'm absolutely going to have to do a Marilyn Monroe episode because it seems like Marilyn Monroe was a lesbian. I don't know where I've been, but like, are all these bitches lesbians? It seems like there was like an underground ring of Hollywood stars, all women sleeping together. Who was going to tell me that? This is like my whole thing. So get ready for some good, juicy old Hollywood lesbian content because I'm going to be all about this. We're going to go one by one, and we're going to talk about all of them being gay. Now, again, Elizabeth Taylor may have been a part of this ring. It seems like she absolutely was. But again, I do think that she was like romantically with these men, which is possible. bisexual awareness. People forget. Okay, so yes. So she may have slept with a Marilyn Monroe. Here's the evidence. So there's a biographer that did a whole biography on Marilyn Monroe. So it's not necessarily Elizabeth Taylor focused. However, it is called The Passion and the Paradox, pretty much talking about Marilyn Monroe's sexuality and the idea that she may have like spent her entire life hiding it, which again, it's crazy how we can like still learn about people. Like this idea of Marilyn Monroe being this like sex crazy male focused star is completely constructed by Hollywood. And how much we still consume that narrative today until you start peeling back layers. And like, I'm in gay media and I think I've heard whispers of this, but how am I now just hearing about this? Like, it's actually crazy and scary. There's so many lesbians, so many gay people, and all of this has been hidden from us. Especially these like blonde, hot women seeming like, you know, familiar, Taylor Swift, can get away with being queer because no one expects them to. So here's an extract of the book that was also published in The Guardian, okay? Quote, at Frank Sinatra's cabaret opening at the Sands, Las Vegas in June 1961, Monroe allegedly had a one-off sexual encounter with Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor allegedly, no, again, do I have pictures of Elizabeth Taylor's journal? No, but this is pretty damn close. This is like fucking evidence, bitch. Okay, like, but this is from her journal. She wrote about Marilyn Monroe, and I quote, her touch was electric. I wanted to see how far the bitch would go. But she had to do all the work. I'm gagged. I'm gagged. There's so much here. First of all, Marilyn being the top makes so much fucking sense. That makes so much fucking sense. Also, I wanted to see how far the bitch would go is fucking crazy. And it's like, we have this idea, and maybe not just we, but like America, the world, that these certain stars, because they became famous in this like purity 1950s, like perfect Christian virginal world where women are not supposed to own their sexuality, we have this idea that they were also like that, and that they were not just real humans with real emotions that cursed and were flagrant and sexual. Because when you see pictures of Elizabeth Taylor, you know, in the 50s and 60s, you don't think that this girl will be saying, I wanted to see how far the bitch would go. So fucking iconic. So it seems like Elizabeth Taylor is sleeping with women and also having relationships with men, but also like having affairs. And all of this is happening behind the scenes of her stardom. And she has these 7 husbands, maybe some of them were beards. And this is inspiration for the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo. And lest we forget, Taylor Swift is writing a song called Elizabeth Taylor, who is one of the more clear inspirations for this gay ass fucking book that people have tied to Taylor Swift herself. More connections to the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo. In the book, Evelyn is in Little Women. She plays a character in Little Women. Guess who is also in Little Women? Elizabeth Taylor was in Little Women. It's just too on the nose. There's also a like specific risque, like artsy movie in 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo that Evelyn does that kind of like makes people be like, oh my gosh, whoa, she's taking chances. She's like doing different stuff. And Elizabeth Taylor did a lot of these roles. Specifically, she did Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? And another thing, Taylor Jenkins Reid, who is the writer of 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, has pretty much said that Elizabeth Taylor was partially the inspiration for the book. So this is not like a crazy theory that she inspired 7 Husbands, okay? It's pretty obvious that this is like mirroring her life. Taylor is mirroring the inspiration for a gay book about someone who has PR relationships. Like, what? And I feel like people are really forgetting that in 2017, Taylor Jenkins Reid responded to a tweet about Taylor. The tweeter said, is that a thing? Tweeter said, could Taylor Swift maybe be Evelyn Hugo? Taylor Jenkins Reid responds, oh, most certainly. But y'all are getting on me for saying, oh my God, stop saying she's gay. Yet Taylor Jenkins Reid is like, yeah, most certainly. Taylor Jenkins Reid also said about Elizabeth Taylor and her being an inspiration, said, quote, Liz Taylor is the most apt comparison. Okay, so right, guys. What are the other similarities between Elizabeth Taylor and the Seven Husbands? Okay, there's that abuse from her husband. It's the similar movies, the characters, and almost kind of the names of the husbands are similar to Elizabeth Taylor's husbands. LGBTQ activism. Evelyn Hugo is a huge LGBTQ activist and decides to use her pocketbook to help LGBTQ people when she can't come out herself. Elizabeth Taylor has become one of the most famous AIDS activists, raising money and starting multiple foundations to find a cure and destigmatize the disease. That's a huge connection too. And let's remember, biggest allies are usually gay. They're also both queer. I mean, Elizabeth Taylor was probably queer. And I really think it's so annoying when people are like, oh my God, don't label someone that like who hasn't labeled themselves. Back then, you couldn't say you were gay. Okay, you barely can now. And I don't know, the fact that they both had exactly 7 husbands. Get real. We will end talking about the connections between Elizabeth Taylor, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and Taylor Swift, and more so my predictions for what's going to happen with this song and this album, okay? We've touched on a lot of this, but Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Taylor won an Oscar for this role, and the whole film is really a critique of a 1950s patriarchal marriage, right? And a lot of it really is strikingly TTPD-esque, okay? And I don't know, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? It's this woman kind of going crazy, and the pressures of this marriage just get to her, and she just kind of loses her mind and flips out. And it feels very psych ward, like the catharsis of the tortured poets department, of just this woman kind of being at her breaking point and just like letting out everything. Is so obvious that Taylor Swift used this as a jumping off point for the song. This movie also had a huge gay response. It became like a gay cult classic, kind of like Taylor Swift in general. It's very clear that Taylor Swift has used Elizabeth Taylor as inspiration even before this. I mean, in Wildest Dreams, I think she looks like Elizabeth Taylor with like her dark brown hair, that music video. She has that lyric, Burton to this Taylor. There's a lot of connections. And now she has a very obvious song on her upcoming album, Elizabeth Taylor. And I really don't think it's any coincidence that she is probably the inspiration for Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Elizabeth Taylor, I mean. Taylor Swift knows that, you guys. She knows that Elizabeth Taylor had 7 husbands. And she's definitely fucking read Seven Husbands. She's like an avid literary nerd. If you guys have not read Seven Husbands, I highly recommend you do so. There's so many lyrical similarities in Taylor Swift's music to the specific writing style and like the wordage used in Seven Husbands. I'm rereading it right now, and I have all of these little pages like marked of where these similarities are. I think I'm probably going to make a whole other episode of like, besides Elizabeth Taylor, like the connections between Seven Husbands and Taylor Swift. And it's littered with connections. But one that I thought was really poignant is like at one point, Evelyn Hugo says, it's rapturous. Taylor Swift has a vinyl for Life of a Showgirl that says it's rapturous, or like a CD called It's Rapturous. Such a specific word. What do you mean? There's a lot of those similarities, though. I really recommend reading it. And then, of course, the Life of a Showgirl cover is so similar to the cover of Seven Husbands. There's this green that's unforgettable and kind of like comes out of nowhere, hasn't really been explained. We knew that orange was going to be TS12, but the green hasn't really been explained. The colors are like exactly the same. The nails of Taylor and the nails of Evelyn on the cover, same exact color. Lip color, same exact color. And the text is very, very similar. And I feel the need to emphasize it again. Taylor Swift is admitting that she draws inspiration from Elizabeth Taylor. She's writing a song called Elizabeth Taylor. She knows that Elizabeth Taylor inspired this book. She knows that Gaylors have drawn connections between her and Seven Husbands before. If she wasn't queer, she wouldn't do this, okay? Because unless she was intentionally queer baiting. And I know people say, oh my God, real people can't queer bait, but I do think projects can. And I don't think she's queer baiting. I think she's queer. Both Elizabeth Taylor and Taylor Swift were both like business women and focusing on like how to use how Hollywood, turns them into commodities, how to use that for their own advantage and spin it to like work for them. They're both splitting themselves into two people, one for the public and one their like inside life. They've had to learn how to separate themselves in that way. They both had toxic relationships with the fame and the media. And there's times where they've been completely exploited and stuck in these contracts with these big studios that are abusing them. They're both arguably queer, question mark, question mark, question mark. Both had rumored flings with rival blondes in the industry. It's kind of bizarre. The language in all three of these people/projects, Taylor, Elizabeth, and Evelyn, are all insanely similar. And I guess with all that said, my argument is I believe Taylor Swift is mirroring her life and taking inspiration from a lot of these old Hollywood women. All the wisest women had to do it this way. They had to use, and this is like feminism and queerness together. It's not just queerness. They had to use what other people made them do. Look what you made me do. They had to use what the industry pushed them out to be for their own advantage. They had to create an inside life and protect it by giving people what they wanted, what they knew the American public would want. They wanted to stay successful in their craft. They were businesswomen. It's not just Elizabeth Taylor, it's Clara Bow. It's all of these, it's Judy Garland. It's all of these huge starlets that Stevie Nicks, that Taylor has researched, used as inspiration, studied, and tried to emulate. And I think has a lot of reverence towards them as well. So I don't think she's just going to write a song called Elizabeth Taylor that's just like jewels, perfume. And if she does, it's a bait and switch because there's definitely more to it. So for Life of a Showgirl, I do think that she is really talking about this theme that I just mentioned and talking about how all of these biggest showgirls at the end of the day, at the end of the night, when they're done performing, they're done, at the studio, they're done singing, they come back to their real life, their real personal life. And it's women that are being abused by the industry, exploited, and having a life that most people don't really know about. Do we really know these people? Do we really know these women? Or do we just know what Hollywood is pushing them out to be? So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you guys think this is as interesting as I do. I would really highly recommend reading more about Elizabeth Taylor and watching this HBO documentary. It's just so fascinating. And old Hollywood, we only get one side of it. And I cannot wait for this upcoming album, the music video specifically. Reminder that I am going live so we can react together and we're just going to have a ball and have some wine, have some fun. And I also have that Patreon bonus episode coming out with my high reactions to the New Heights podcast. I had a very fun time doing it, so I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, I think I won't have an episode until after Life of a Showgirl. So I will see you live. Go check out that bonus content on Patreon. And yeah, have a great week. Love you guys.